Okay, welcome back. You've brought us something really fascinating for this deep dive.
Yes, it's a research paper called Explainable AI for Trust, Case Study on Integrity Scoring in Philippine Disinformation.
Right, by Erics and Katz. And we don't just have the paper, we've also got some author notes and a Q&A.
Exactly. The idea is to really, get under the skin of this research, understand this new way they're proposing to assess online information trustworthiness.
Specifically in the Philippines, tackling disinformation there.
Yeah, and it's not just about flagging fake news, it's more nuanced, looking at manipulation tactics online.
And the sources we have. There's a simulation summary, Katz's own reflections and answers on limitations and design philosophy.
That's right.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The Philippines context seems key here. Why focus so much on that specific digital environment?
Well, it's insightful because the Philippines has this really distinct online landscape. You've got a mix of languages, very strong social networks,
Mhm.
and these deeply embedded political narratives tied to their culture and history.
So standard sort of one-size-fits-all approaches don't really work?
Exactly. They often fall short
Mm.
because what looks like manipulation in one place might just be, normal discourse there. It's very context dependent.
That makes a lot of sense. So this research introduces a system to handle that, the AiEON Engagement Analysis Framework, or EAF. Tell us about that.
Right. The AiEON EAF, that's the core of it. It's a system designed to score social media content for its integrity. Basically, its trustworthiness.
And a key part is that it's explainable AI.
Yes, that's crucial. It means how it gets those scores isn't a black box. The process is designed to be transparent, understandable.
So it shows its work, in a way, not just a simple yes or no.
Pretty much. The ultimate aim is a method that's really aware of the cultural and social environment it's operating in.
A context-aware and culturally adaptive way to look at online info.
Exactly. And it's not just technical. It's grounded in some important ethical ideas and broader theories, too.
Okay, what are the ethical foundations here?
Well, they explicitly mention aligning with global guidelines, like the OECD AI principles.
Uh-huh. Human-centered values, transparency.
Right. And the EAF really tries to make transparency concrete with its explainable scoring. It directly tackles that black box problem you hear about with AI.
I see.
And it also draws from UNESCO's AI ethics recommendations focusing on fairness, respect, human dignity. It's about making sure these assessment systems are aligned with, basic human values.
So building ethics right into the system design.
Yeah.
And you mentioned broader theories.
Yeah, critical theories about information influenced it too, like Floridy's idea of the infosphere.
The world shaped by information.
Exactly. And how easily that gets polluted by disinformation.
Yeah.
So the EAF, aiming for integrity, is like a form of digital sanitation, you could say.
Interesting way to put it.
Then there's Zuboff's surveillance capitalism concerns about hidden data use.
Mm.
The EAF's transparency is kind of a counter to that opaqueness.
Okay. And I think Noble's work on algorithmic bias was mentioned.
Yes, addressing how algorithms can reflect and even amplify societal biases. The EAF tries to mitigate that, especially with its context-specific approach.
Got it. So these big ideas help shape the why and how. So how does it actually score the content? What are the mechanics?
Okay, this is where it gets really practical. It uses a weighted scoring system. It looks at several different factors in a social media post and assigns importance to each.
Right. A weighted average, basically.
Essentially, yes.
Okay, let's break down those factors. What's it looking at?
There are 5 main ones. First, the biggest chunk, 35%, is disinformation probability. That's the system's best guess on whether the content is misleading or false.
Makes sense. What's next?
Second, 25%, is source credibility. Pretty straightforward. How trustworthy is the origin of the post? A reliable source boosts the score.
Okay, those two cover a lot. What else?
Third, at 10%, is sentiment polarity. It analyzes the emotional tone. Interestingly, really extreme positive or negative sentiment can actually lower the score slightly, as high emotion can sometimes signal manipulation.
Okay. Not just negative stuff. And the fourth?
Fourth is a deepfake penalty, weighted at 20%. If it detects synthetically generated or significantly altered media images, video, it gets hit with a penalty.
That seems crucial now. Definitely. And the last factor?
The final one, 10%, is the DDS penalty. This is super specific to the Philippines.
DDS, what's that referring to?
It refers to the DDS network, which are online groups known for supporting former President Duterte, often with coordinated messaging, and it also flags red tagging.
Remind us what red tagging is.
It's a really dangerous practice of falsely accusing people or groups of being communists or terrorists, often leading to real-world harassment or worse.
Wow. Okay, so this penalty directly targets those known local tactics.
Exactly. It's a prime example of the localization.
So it's doing more than just keyword spotting then. The paper mentions narrative-aware tagging. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, that's a key point. It's more sophisticated. Instead of just finding specific words, it tries to grasp the broader rhetorical frame, the ideology behind the post.
How do they do that?
Well, think of it like this. It doesn't just see strong leader. It analyzes the context, the phrasing, the overall tone to see if it fits a known narrative pattern, like maybe one that subtly undermines democratic norms, which is a tactic seen in some Philippine campaigns.
So understanding the underlying message, not just the surface words.
Precisely. It's about the potential for manipulation baked into the narrative itself.
That sounds much more advanced. And this DDS penalty, like you said, really shows the focus on the Philippines. What other ways is it specifically tailored?
Well, the data set they used for testing was entirely drawn from the Philippine online space real posts and synthetic ones designed to mimic local disinformation.
Okay.
And they built what they call a lexicon of Filipino disinformation terms. It's basically a curated list of tags and definitions specific to common tactics there.
Like the DDS network and red tagging we mentioned.
Yeah, and also things like tokang denialism, which tries to downplay or justify killings during the anti-drug campaign. These very local elements let it assess information integrity much more accurately within that context.
So definitely not a generic tool. They really drilled down. Now tell us about the simulation they ran. What was the setup?
Right, the simulation, it was basically a test drive. They took 100 posts, 50 real ones from the Philippines, 50 synthetic ones mimicking local disinformation, and ran them through the EAF.
And the goal was just to see if it could tell the difference.
Yeah, could it distinguish the potentially misleading synthetic posts from the real ones by giving them different integrity scores?
And did it work? What were the main findings?
The results looked pretty promising. On average, the synthetic posts got significantly lower integrity scores than the authentic ones.
So it could flag the likely dodgy stuff.
It suggests it could, yeah. And interestingly, real posts with very strong emotional language also tended to score a bit lower.
Picking up on that sentiment factor.
Right. And crucially, the DDS penalty did its job. It significantly dragged down the scores of posts tagged with those specific network or red tagging terms.
Okay, so the AI seemed to be responding to the right signals. But they didn't just trust the AI's numbers, did they? There was a human validation part.
Exactly. That's key. To check if the EAF scores actually meant something sensible, they had 3 human experts evaluate a subset of 20 posts.
Experts familiar with the Philippine context?
Yes, people deeply familiar with Filipino social media discourse. They rated the posts using the same kind of criteria the EAF uses. Then they compared the AI scores to the average human scores.
And what was the verdict? Did the AI and humans agree?
They found a strong positive correlation. The paper reports it as R20.85.
Wow, 0.85 is pretty high in this kind of comparison, isn't it?
It is. It indicates a really good level of agreement between the EAF's automated scoring and the nuanced judgments of humans who understand the local context. It's strong evidence for the potential effectiveness of the tool, at least in this setting.
That is compelling. But like any research, especially with AI, there must be questions, limitations. The Q&A and notes probably cover some critiques.
Oh yeah, they address several points head-on. For instance, they acknowledge the simulation used only 100 posts, which is relatively small.
Right.
But they frame it as an initial proof of concept, not the final word.
What about potential bias in creating those 50 synthetic posts? Could they have accidentally made them too easy to spot?
That's a valid concern raised. The author notes they tried to base them on real-world examples, but acknowledges that generating truly representative synthetic data is always a challenge. Future work would need broader validation.
And the human evaluation people can be subjective too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They mention that.
Yeah.
But they tried to mitigate it by using 3 different evaluators and looking for consensus that triangulated scoring process you mentioned.
Ah, okay.
And they agree that future studies could use larger, more diverse groups of human raters.
What about those weights for the 5 factors? 35% for disinformation probability, 10% for sentiment. Seems a bit, I don't know, arbitrary.
They address that too. They say the initial weights came from their understanding and some early tests. But, importantly, the EAF is designed to be flexible.
How so?
Users can apparently adjust those weights to see how it changes things. And future versions might even have tools to help calibrate the weights based on more data or specific needs.
Okay, so it's adaptable, but if it's so tailored to the Philippines, how useful could it really be elsewhere? Is it too specific?
That's a key question about generalizability. The author argues the underlying framework is modular,
I mean,
meaning you could swap out the Philippine-specific lexicon and penalties and plug in new ones relevant to, say, India or Brazil or somewhere else without rebuilding the whole engine.
so the structure is transferable, potentially.
That's the idea. It's designed for adaptation, not just replication.
But what about the cat and mouse game? If it relies on specific tags and lexicons, won't disinformation actors just learn to avoid them?
Always a risk. The researchers acknowledge that tactics evolve. That's why they stress the EAF needs dynamic updating. The lexicons aren't set in stone. They need continuous refinement, maybe even with community input.
Right, it has to learn. And that narrative-aware part sounds powerful, but also complex. Is it truly explainable if it's doing that kind of deep analysis?
Yeah, complexity versus explainability is a trade-off. They argue the EAF is still explainable because it breaks down how different elements, tone, themes, sentiment, framing, contribute to the final score.
So you see the ingredients, if not the full recipe.
Sort of. And they mention future plans for maybe generating natural language rationales, explaining why a narrative was flagged in plain English.
That would be useful. What about just plain errors? False positives flagging good info as bad? Or false negatives missing actual disinformation?
Good point. The initial study focused more on the correlation and distinguishing real synthetic, but they explicitly say analyzing false positives and negatives is a critical next step.
So more testing needed on different kinds of data?
Definitely. They mentioned they're already doing that, testing on more diverse data sets to really understand its precision and recall where it makes mistakes.
And finally, the whole landscape keeps shifting. Can a system like this really keep up?
They seem realistic about that. They emphasize the EAF isn't a one-off fix. It's meant to be a living framework.
Meaning it constantly needs to be updated.
Exactly. Updated knowledge base, refined algorithms, community feedback. The key, they argue, is keeping that explainability core even as it evolves to face new tactics.
Okay, this has been a really thorough look. So boiling it down for the listener, what are the biggest takeaways here? What's really incitement about this EAF research?
Well, for me, first is just the innovative approach using explainable AI for something as fuzzy as information integrity. That transparency focus is huge. Second, it absolutely hammers home how critical cultural context is. You can't fight local disinformation effectively with a generic global tool.
Right, localization is key.
Third, that narrative awareness idea. Moving beyond just checking facts to understanding the framing and potential manipulation in the message itself. That feels like a necessary step.
Yeah, more subtle.
Fourth, it shows the potential for these localized AI governance solutions.
Yeah.
Maybe we need more tools designed for specific regions.
Instead of trying to make one tool fit everyone.
Exactly. And finally, I think the researchers' openness about the limitations and their future plans is actually a strength. It builds credibility.
Yeah, acknowledging what you don't know yet, those are great points. And it really leaves you wondering, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, thinking about other places, could you build similar, localized, explainable AI frameworks for other cultures, other political contexts, you know? And what specific, unique challenges would pop up if you tried to do that somewhere else?
That's a really good question to ponder. What would a U.S.-specific penalty look like, or one for France or Kenya? What narratives would it need to understand?
It's definitely food for thought.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for taking this deep dive with us into the AiEON EAF research.
Pleasure.
It really highlights, I think, both the potential of this kind of context-aware, explainable AI, but also, you know, the ongoing challenges in tackling something as complex as online disinformation.
It's definitely not solved, but this offers a promising direction. Continuous development is key.
For sure.
Yeah.
So if this sparked your interest, maybe explore explainable AI more or look into algorithmic bias or the specific issues around disinformation in the Philippines.
Lots to dig into.
Indeed. We'll be back soon with another deep dive. Thanks for listening.